Greetings.
Greetings.
Welcome. And we are going to do a talk today on ambition and the place that it has in yoga. And the idea for this talk came when I was out in our yard the other day here in the jungle. And I, in the side yard, have some lemongrass that grows spontaneously in the side yard, which as a cook, that's like this amazing thing that I found. And I saw this lemongrass there, and if you've ever worked with lemongrass and you see this beautiful end on it, and you can scratch it and smell what the lemongrass smells like, it was just really exciting for a moment. The jungle's pretty boring. And then after about 6 weeks or something, I started noticing all this lemongrass popping up right in this one area. And I thought, wow, that's how lemongrass works. It's like aspen trees or something. It just spreads infinitely. And I was so happy that I had all this lemongrass at my disposal for cooking. And then I learned that actually, as I would go out there and kind of fuddle around in the lemongrass, that I would start getting really itchy, and I thought maybe I was allergic to it or whatever. And it turns out that right next to the lemongrass, and I have some here, is another thing that grows. And it just started growing after the lemongrass grows, and this is what it looks like. And in fact, this has been cut for a few hours, and so it's thinner leaves, but in the wild, the leaves look identical to the lemongrass. So I didn't have a bunch of lemongrass. I had lemongrass and a bunch of weeds. And you can tell the difference, I learned, between the lemongrass and the weed because you can run your thumb down the leaf, the long leaf of the plant.
The
and
lemongrass.
When you do this on the lemongrass, like so, it feels really sweet and nice and easy. And when you do that on, I won't do it on the weed, because when you do it on the weed, it is really uncomfortable. It's like sandpaper, but then you itch afterwards. So as I was out there, I started thinking, wow, this is like this amazing thing in nature where you have something that is valued, and then you have something that is so much the look-alike to it that comes alongside and either rides on the wave of the pleasant one, or for some reason has this propensity, probably due to the natural way of evolution, just for this weed's survival, to mimic the lemongrass, to look like the lemongrass. And as I was out there working, it made me start thinking, wow, that's this characteristic that we run into in humans as well, where we are looking at someone and we think that they have all the trappings, all the external aspects of something that we value, and they have cultivated them really carefully. And then we realize they actually don't have the essence or the real juice and the real essence of what it is they are pretending to be. And that would be called a charlatan, someone who, out of whatever motivation, decides that they are going to mimic something for their own advantage. And of course, in nature, it's quite natural that this happens. And so it made me realize, well, this is a natural part of being human too, is to mimic things. But where it becomes twisted and goes wrong and becomes unpleasant is when the mind and the ego grab hold of it and purposely make this sort of false impression or false display of things.
yeah, for the purpose of self-aggrandizement, of just gaining power, or some kind of imagined immortality or permanence or pleasure or something, without actually doing being the true lemongrass.
Yeah. And so,
it's like charlatanism.
Charlatanism. And charlatanism has within it this quality of ambition. Because to be a charlatan, you have this idea that you want something. And ambition, you might define, how would you define ambition?
Wanting something, but with the word seems to imply a tinge of selfishness to it. I want it for my imagined self, so that I can excel and I can be ultimately powerful, wealthy, or I can even be immortal, as opposed to everybody else.
But ambition could be a good quality. And
if we
and indeed
spread the meaning of the word a little wider.
So if you spread the meaning of the word ambition a little wider and pull it out of this idea of charlatanism, so when you are a con man or a con woman or a con being, and that's an ambition is in there, that's a bad combination, because it causes not only a perpetuation of falsehoods, but it always causes damage to others. And in yoga, one of the things that all of us have seen is where ambition, which could be a good thing, because ambition, I guess, is like needing to have, it involves hard work, it has directedness, you could have ambition to work in a way that is beneficial to all others. And then really, truly, that becomes this motivation, and your ambition could be a good ambition, right?
Yeah. And here the words get funny. You become, with the right ambition, I would love to actually be helpful to others, to be of good service, so that not only do I become happy, but others become happy, because that's the real happiness. It's shared amongst all beings. And so I want to do that. And if that's sincere, then I'll be committed to doing whatever it takes, but without this selfish motive. In other words, I can experiment, I can act, but I'm acting without attachment to the fruit of the action, which is the classic example. But I'm acting with an initial, and I have a formula, but I understand from the beginning that I just have a formula. So I want good fruits for the sake of offering to others. And so it's a very confusing thing, isn't it? I'm ambitious to not be ambitious, in the selfish, egotistical sense. But I'm ambitious to be ambitious in the sense of being selfless or not causing harm to myself or others. But what my mind has done, probably too frequently, is I say, I am ambitious to have no ambition, or I really want to not have desire, because desire is evil, and therefore I'm going to get rid of it. And so I become, or with anger, which is the product of desire. Whenever anger arises in others, I get angry, because I want to get rid of their anger, because I know it's bad. And then when it arises in me, I go, I get angry at my own anger, and it's less, starts to tumble, or the snowball effect of like, this is ridiculous. And
So when it was kind of a relief for both Richard and me when I came in, and we were talking about this idea of these plants and how this impulse or this natural process happens where, there is this sort of survival mechanism that comes into play where in nature things mimic one another, or things have the ambition to grow. And the difference between what happens in nature and being human is that we separate ourselves out from nature. And so we, instead of realizing this process of mimicking or of becoming the charlatan is something that is prone to happen to all of us. And when we see it happening, we have a moment of choice where there is a potential action where we can either jump on that wagon and ride it, the wagon of I'm the charlatan, or we can, and that would be where the ambition comes into play. Or we can say, whoa, this is this process, and what is it within the context of this situation that triggers the sort of reflex or desire or whatever to have ambition that goes awry, or charlatanism, or desires that goes awry. We wanted to also look at these in terms, desire being the third one, so charlatanism, ambition, and desire, both in terms of how we define them sort of in everyday language, but also where they are reflected in some of the teachings.
Mm-hmm. So we have the desire comes from, according to many schools, if you see something incorrectly, you see it as being separate from the web that it's actually part of. We call it the web of nature. Mm-hmm. And so that misperception, seeing it as a separate object, then causes you to, in some cases, want it, or in other cases are repulsed by it, or at least in many cases, how can it be used by this almost imaginary structure of your own, now the new story of yours, how can you use it? And so that ignorance or that misperception is kind of from the Yoga Sutra, the kleshas, it's the kind of the swamp from which egotism then rises up, or I amness, and then from I amness you get raga and dvesha, or that raga, ambition, and then dvesha is like the shadow side of the ambition, which is like repulsion or trying to, anger. And then in general, then the fifth of the kleshas is abhinivesha, which is again back to the biological, or the having to do with just the fact that you have a body of like.
And they become
fear
confused.
Of death.
Yeah, they become confused because like when you start, and we keep bringing it back to yoga, where you've probably experienced people or yourself having moments of charlatanism or, extreme ambition, like ambition in trying to do a particular posture, and then, hearing a loud pop and realizing that wasn't so good after all. that those kinds of impulses are very much the human addition to this natural process, which is this process of survival. And yet, because we have desires and repulsions that are as viscerally intense sometimes as the fear of death, it becomes confused in our nervous system and then in our storyline that, whether this is actually a life-threatening situation, if I don't get my leg behind my head and I don't become someone who can, dominate the world in my own little way in this own little yoga studio, that becomes confused viscerally and mentally, and then how we behave in the world. And so it's differentiated very much from the natural process because we find ourselves in a context where we can get some feedback from the context and from others when we are going off the rails.
Off the rail, off the deep end.
Yeah.
That's the importance, I think, of Sangha or community. And you have many other practitioners in life, even though they might not belong to your particular religious cult or the cult of you, although you hope to
Convert them
someday soon. But they are your feedback system. And it's not only, and initially for the practical level it's other humans, but then other beings in general, because there are a lot of sentient beings, they're also part of the same family. They're also part of the Sangha, and they'll give you feedback too. But we, in other words, objectify them. We look at them as objects, and then therefore we don't listen to them. And so we calculate how we can make them submit to us, or how they can give us a thumbs up on social media or something, and how we can profit.
And then we don't really hear their feedback.
Yeah.
So that one of the things with ambition is that it can be a good thing in yoga. It has a place in yoga because it can boot one out of sort of a tamasic state.
Yeah.
But when it is causing damage to oneself or to others, that's when it becomes problematic. And when we don't use the tools that we are given, like feedback, by really acknowledging them, listening deeply to what others say. And for instance, when you hear something you don't want to hear about yourself, which happens plenty of times in life.
Even from your own mind.
Yeah, especially from your own mind.
I'm such a good meditator, and part of your mind that goes, ha ha.
And you ignore it.
And you ignore that. Even feedback from your own, let's say, unconscious, it's completely ignored. So we ignore our inner charlatan as we obsess on the outer charlatan around us.
And so two of the texts that we wanted to kind of focus on today that deal with these ideas of, sort of desire, and they don't really talk about charlatanism, although the Gita almost does, are the Gita and the Ishopanishad. Just so...
For example, and so what we want you, as a result, is that people go, this is very interesting. Let me look at it more closely. And so the last part of the Gita, the last 6 chapters, are not usually read, because by that time you've already decided, what your religion is, and you've already got it, and you've checked it off.
And
then it's
also, yeah, in the Gita, this curious thing happens where it almost seems like the same thing is being said over and over and over. And so you're like, okay, I've already read about the gunas, I've already read about this, let me get on to the very end. And so, but there's this.
But it's very different.
Yeah.
And it starts looking at, and you've learned, in the first 12 chapters about love and yoga, and they're really, wisdom. You just love it, and you think, that's me. And then, I'm going to do yoga, and I'm like Arjuna here, and I have experienced the Vishvarupa, at least and your ego checks even that off. I have experienced God in my own body. And then what the Gita does, it then goes back and says, hold on, let's take a close look at these religious practices, all of these things that we think are wonderful, but let's look closely at them within ourselves and within others. And so, for example, the 16th chapter is on the demonic. And it talks about the religious practices, all of the different practices of yoga, when they've gone, into charlatanism, basically. And it's quite shocking, and in which you think, oh, I've understood non-dualism, and then it says, then it goes into, the demon says, Ishwaroham, I am Ishwara. And you've learned from non-dualism, I am ultimately not the constructed ego. The story of you is, but I am Ishwara, and I am the enjoyer. And of course, I'm think, well, that's not mine. It's the true me. Aham bogi siddho, I am perfect. I am balavan sukhi, I am strong and happy.
And right about here is when the ego's like, whoa, this is sounding good.
Yeah. And so I will make sacrifice. I will lord over. And so it goes on, in which you start to see that this is the demonic mind is using the vocabulary of yoga, trying to gain the actual control of the adoration of all beings in subjugation. I look at my success, look at my wealth, look at my power, all beings will bow down to me. And this is from a conception of the divine as being an idol or a tyrant, which the Gita earlier has taken apart quite, but then, I will become the tyrant. And this is, in studying or contemplating, this is a phase that everyone's mind goes in, I am God, all of a sudden, or I am, and some of it, an outdated definition of that as tyrant, or as commander-in-chief, or...
And it may not go to that extreme. It may not be that you follow it to that commander-in-chief end, but that or that you are God. But, it is a natural tendency of human mind to go off on that tangent. And so when you are a yoga practitioner or a student, which hopefully we all remain till the very end.
That's the point of this.
Yeah.
We're just students.
That you learn to see these characteristics arising at some point, and then the moment you can see them, and to see their connectedness to everything else, that in and of itself stops the process of becoming the charlatan or having ambition become damaging to others.
Mhm.
And so in this chapter, this is what is discussed in actually relation to the gunas, right? And
Well, that's later on
yeah.
that it's dissected into the gunas. But the chapter does, it's kind of a shocking thing,
Yeah.
because it's almost like, and in mythology, in there, all of these characters, many of them have become godlike um, through the disciplines of concentration of mind, and then through religious discipline, through by adhering to a literal kind of a literal religious path, because they discover this is the secret to getting things, is religion. And so basically a kind of idolatry is established, and in which we might place a golden calf on the throne, or whatever you like, or a book. You can place, even the Upanishads on the throne, or any book that you can think of, and the process of idolatry actually is then placing the idolater on the throne also, and that temptation. And it's totally a natural state of mind. As soon as in my mind I reduce even the teachings of a wonderful, profound, mystical poetry to simply, the ego collapses, I got it. And then you go out as a snake oil salesman. Now I'm going to profit from it. And it's totally natural. I think everyone's, if I say everyone's mind does that to some degree, that would be an admission.
Yeah, it would reveal a lot about you that you don't want to
that
reveal.
one. This is what mind does. And again, back to our theme, this is actually part of nature for the mind to misperceive by making objects and subjects, by creating stories, which are ultimately based in mental construction and misperception of things. And then basically the end of that demonic chapter is, you just got to go to Arjuna, Krishna is saying, you just got to go to the traditional teachings and learn to practice according to these ancient traditions, which are, even at that time, thousands of years old, where thousands of practitioners have experienced the difficulties, and just do it. And then that's the end of the chapter. Just do it according to tradition. And then
But it's not, to do it according to a dogma so
Yeah.
much as it is do it according to
healthy, deep tradition.
Yeah.
which
And so
is-
one of the things Richard was saying this morning as we were talking about this is, that one of the solutions for ambition that goes awry, which happens, is sincerely and honestly do good practice.
Oh, yeah, good
Rather than, and then we have to say, well, how do you know whether you're doing that or not?
Yeah. And so the rest of the Gita talks about all of these different practices, like even the practice of Shraddha, which is your religious faith, or Virya, which is the courage, the confidence, and also usually good posture that comes from having strong faith. But that faith could be in an idol, and that faith could make you virya, so that you could smite the enemy and smite others down, to get them to bow down ultimately to your ego, or to the ego that you're...
Or the doctrine.
Yeah. And then all of the different practices of yoga then are presented in a way that's, as they are reflected in the qualities of nature of the three gunas. And so, just to review, that all of the webbing, the interconnected web of nature is composed of three qualities of transformation, tamas, rajas, and sattva. And Tamas is the establishment of, this is it. And then Rajas is when everything that was left out of that, which turns out to be most of everything, says, no, it's not. And then you get Rajas, or back and forth. And then when you not just understand, but you start to experience that those two are actually, that the two things opposing each other are actually interconnected. Then you experience, the actual joy of interconnectedness. And as that gets deeper, you start to see that it's the joy of feeling the divinity of nature, including the mind, and part of the mind is this process of avidya, or misperception.
And that's the sensation of sattva.
Yeah, and that's sattva,
Right.
or goodness. And so the interesting point is avidya, or misperception. You can't live with it, and you can't live without it. And also with vidya, or seeing that there is no separate subject. You can't live with it alone or without it. And so that's the funny part that the mind doesn't really get. And so part of, say, Ishopanishad, which everyone should memorize. Okay.
Or at least read.
Yeah, at least read. They say if you worship what is manifest, as an idolater, like, oh, there's the golden calf, or there's the, there's me on an altar, or there's, that idolatry, If you worship what is manifest as being absolute, you are in darkness. But then what the mind does, it says, oh, I understand that manifest stuff is impermanent, and so I'm going to worship the unmanifest. Ha ha ha. And that's a little trick. The ego is really fast. And it goes, then I worship what is unmanifest. And so they say that if you worship what is manifest, you enter darkness. And then if you worship what is unmanifest, you enter into a deeper darkness. Oh, no. And then you can I imagine then the poet who just kind of almost giggling in the background. Gotcha. And so, and that's the puzzle of this. And so, the function of misperception, in which you mistake something for then the category or the name that you give it, that function of misperception is what makes the manifestation of time and space. And then if you label that, oh, that's time and space is bad, then you've just made a bigger mistake, because you've just taken the mistake back onto itself. And we tend to do this as yoga people.
And
everyone tends to do it.
It's almost like that is this sort of composting material from which these negative aspects of, ambition and desire, and that they take root in, and that they can then grow from, and you stop being able to separate yourself out from them, because you've taken root through this mess and manifested with a lot of delusion of self. And so what you find is you then have had a lot of ambition to do something, or you notice that you've become a charlatan, and it's too late to backtrack, or it feels too late to backtrack without destroying your ego, which has been the root of all of it. And in fact, it's like pulling an abscessed tooth. If you're able to undo all that, rather than to go into deluded states of, well, I'm just going to practice for other beings because that's an important thing for me to do, If you can backtrack from that, the clarity starts to, shine through almost immediately, and then you see a path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's such a funny subject because you can't live with it and you can't live without it. Mm-hmm. Is what we say that. And I was thinking of again the Ishopanishad, mm-hmm. Which remember the Ishavasham. Yeah. Okay, so and it's dealing with the paradox of the ego. You can't live with it because it's really bad, but you can live without it. And so basically the Upanishad is teaching that time and space are basically these manifestations that come from avidya, or not knowing, mm-hmm. or confusion, in which you overlay different layers of mind. You get them confused, and then you get a manifestation. And that's the principle of creation. So ignorance or misperception is the principle of the creation of time and space. Mm-hmm. Okay, and time and space are pretty interesting if you've ever checked them out. And so what the teaching is that the mind, which is where you get this confusion going, manifests space and time. And then if you really watch that process, mm-hmm. you'll see that the process of ignorance is also divine. And so this is one of the most difficult things to explain.
That's why I'm doing it here.
Thank you. You can't live with it, and you can't live without it. Okay, space and time. And so let's look at that Upanishad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ishavasham, Vigadum Sarvam, that all of this is enveloped by Ishvara. So Ishvara is, let us say, not necessarily, it is on a personal level, that which is precious to you as representative of truth. So Isha could also be, it doesn't have to be God in the ordinary sense. It means like the beloved real person.
Or even nature.
Yeah, or even nature, whatever the definition. So all of this is enveloped by that. And so pleasure actually comes from tyag, because you realize that it doesn't actually belong to the constructed you. And so this turns the whole idea of who you are, what you are, upside down, in saying that because all of this is enveloped by, not just enveloped, but all of this is Ishvara, who is the beloved. Therefore, real pleasure comes from letting it go rather than grasping at it. Mm-hmm. And so the phenomenon of the world is based in this flipping of the layers in which you start to go off and create stories of time and space. Okay. So, like the story of me. Story that I'm interested in, but you'll probably find pretty boring, but everyone has the story of them, and this story is actually ultimately a fantasy. It's a construction that will fall apart with wisdom, but also all of time and space. And so the paradox is real pleasure comes from tyag, or letting it go. And in letting it go, you're seeing that there's actually nothing in it, and there's no one to hold on to it. And so it becomes just like the sunlight. And so the first verse of this Upanishad is talking about the mystery of what yoga practice is. That it's actually tyag, which means to let go. And then of course my mind, when I'm first a student of that, I misinterpret that. And I think tyag means let it go because it's impermanent. It is below me. But not seeing that, that phenomenon of mind is also that divine process of nature. And so it turns the whole idea of enjoyment completely on its head. That real pleasure comes from letting it go.
And when you juxtapose pleasure with ambition, where ambition goes awry is when one imagines that the pleasure is reaching whatever goal one has set through this ambition, rather than being in the moment and watching each step unfold, and watching the ambition be something that is within the process of your life, a process. So putting down the ambition rather than, well, I'm not going to be ambitious, but being able to put down the storyline of the ambition which has separated, which has caused avidya, which has separated something from something else, you from something else, is how to dovetail on the natural, the natural tendency to have ambition, to have desire, to become a charlatan, or become a lookalike, or use the surface.
Yeah, and that basic problem that they say makes the universe manifest is confusing nama and rupa, which is the name of something with the actual ding an zi, the thing in itself. And then you say, oh, that is a hand, or that's a bell, anything you look at. And what you need to do in order to manifest, in time and space, but then you hold too tightly to it, and suffering comes. And so you get nama and rupa confused, and that causes the manifestation of time and space. But then, if you see the process occurring, you can let it go naturally, because you'll see that it's endless and infinite, and you just go, wow. And that's the tyag, or the letting it go. It's just like the sun shines by letting go of its own process. And so tyag, which means to release, it's just the opposite of what the ordinary mind thinks is necessary to get happy. So I'm going to get happy by accumulating merit. I'm going to accumulate knowledge as I imagine it to be. And that's natural. And so that's all the ego is collecting and collecting. Okay. And so that verse is very funny. Okay. And so it's the natural process.
So ambition, too, is a paradox, I guess.
Yeah. And so at a certain point, I become ambitious to let go of ambition. Ever had that? Isha avaisham bhum saram yatkincha jagatyam jagat. Tena taktena, letting go. Bun is the real pleasure. It's quite a mystery. Okay. And so, what this Upanishad is starting to teach is that you can't live with it, you can't live without it, so to speak. So time and space and manifestation are based in misperception or ignorance. And so when you experience this, there's this natural, you let it go. I was just thinking of you let it go like a hot potato. You just go. You don't like cling on to it, but that's a bad metaphor, I think. You just, when you naturally see, oh, there's no one there, that letting go is the actual pleasure.
Yeah.
That deep, true pleasure comes from letting it go. And that is even letting go of the ambition that the mind has construction to be enlightened, or the ambition to gain, the ambition to become immortal. And these are natural ambitions.
Yeah. So it's waking up and seeing the ambition and not rejecting it, but also not being driven by it. Yeah. So it definitely has a place in yoga. And you definitely have seen, and I've seen, it take people off a good, solid, healthy practice for years. So it's something to be really, very skillful with yourself about, to really ask yourself, what is my motivation behind this, and what are my intentions, behind my ambition or non-ambition.
Right. And the mind always creates that funny little loop. I'm ambitious to not be ambitious. And have you ever, notice your mind doing that, what you got to do is go, ha, you got to laugh, because I am ambitious to see that I am ambitious to be non-ambitious. And that's the starting of a chain that gets rather silly after a few redundancies. And that's when we have this thing, when you start to see the feedback loop of your own mind as being what they call silly or empty. If you're Buddhist, sele, holy, silly, or meaning empty, you go, ha.
And then it's exciting.
And then the process of mind is still there, but it's like you can't hurt anybody, because you see how silly your own mind is. And then then you're able to release. And they say that the release is the joy.
And so you really know whether or not, like one sign, whether or not you're practicing in a healthy way, is that you are like intrinsically happier, and that you are intrinsically kind, that you're nice, that those are signs that you're happy and that you're just nice. It's not like, well, I'm going to try to be nice, but you see a little bug on the windowsill and you give it a cloth to cling on to and let it go out. You escort it outdoors. And you're not thinking, well, this is going to be an act of kindness. It's just like,
I will gain, yeah. Well, your mind might think, I will gain such merit by saving this bug, or saving.
And you notice when you are not, or you will know you are not practicing in a sattvic way overall, or in a healthy way overall, when you realize you are being angry, or you are unhappy, or worse yet, causing damage to others, which can happen when you are filled with, ambition that has gone awry. We've got some questions.
Oh.
Can I say any last thing?
Oh. The final word. An interesting thing about Ishopanishad, or any of the early Upanishads, or Yoga Sutra, or Heart Sutra, is they're describing this rather slippery middle path between the different extremes that the mind goes to. Like, I should throw it all away, it's all this or it's all that. But the invitation from all these different interrelated traditions is, maybe look again. And so they want you to watch the actual process that is arising in the present moment, rather than making, and you'll watch yourself make a convenient formula out of it, so that your ego can say, I got it, and then it gets back to, collecting fame and fortune or whatever it does. But the invitation of all these different traditions is, slow down, look again. It's much more interesting than what you've just reduced it to. And this is especially true for the tradition of yoga.
Yeah. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. So one of them was, why should anyone spend so much time to bring their leg behind the head? This feeds ambition very much. Why not spending that time just to sit still and meditate?
Well, putting your leg, some people find it easy to put their leg behind their head, and when they're just lying around on the sofa, they just flip their leg behind their head. It's quite an interesting thing. And so, placing the body into various asanas will give you and doing it mindfully, will allow you to feel different patterns of sensation patterns that perhaps are easy for you, and then finding in that complementary patterns that are perhaps difficult for you. And this will take you it'll start to undo habits of mind that might be revealed through just sitting practice, but sometimes sitting practice might not go that deep into the samskaras, because in just sitting, one can become tamasic or rajasic. And so sometimes, and it depends on the person.
Yeah.
And so for some people, simply sitting with good posture is helpful, but for other people, in that good posture, if they then roll to different patterns of habit, and it exposes habits or areas of the mind which are deeply hidden or deeply scarred, as in the word samskara.
Yeah, and so exactly that, depending on one's own circumstances, it could be something to try to put your leg behind your head and really force it, could be something that causes a negative manifestation of ambition within you. But it may not. And so to really exercise honesty when you are doing your asana practice, and to look closely at what it is you're choosing to do, what it is you have fear of, what it is you do, and you say, well, one of my favorite things to joke about is you say to, a normal person, and they go into a yoga pose, and you say, does that hurt? And they say, yeah, kind of doesn't feel good on my hip joint or whatever. But you say that to an Ashtangi sometimes, not all Ashtangis, but some Ashtangis, and you say, does that hurt? And they say, not much. And that's when you notice that it actually, you're ignoring the sensations that your body's giving you, or the real reason, like I want to have my selfie, I want to have my Instagram post, and that's why I need to do that. So to really pick it apart. And if you are uncertain, whether it's the meditation and sitting still or putting the head behind the head, if you're uncertain what the motivation is, look again. And look at it not only theoretically, but in the moment when you are either driven or repulsed to do it.
Yeah, so the yoga asana is part of the actually tantric tradition, and this is where you're looking. It's not like you're looking for trouble, but you're going deep to find deep patterns of habit and misperception. And for some people, it depends on the individual. Sometimes they can simply sit quite nicely, and others will sit and become very dull and do years and years and years of sitting and simply are kind of snoozing. And so it depends on the individual.
And that ties in with another question: can a tamasic state of mind cause too much lack of ambition? Exactly. And possibly would cultivating ambition at that point be a healthy balancing? And if you're defining ambition without separating yourself out from others, but if you can define ambition as something that is something that propels you ahead but also leaves you deeply connected, then that could kind of boot you out of the tamasic.
Yeah, so if you look at the dull, stuck state of tamas as being perhaps even excessively idolatrous. This is it. That's it. And you're just sitting there, and then part of your own mind, and then probably part of a lot of other people around you who know you, they're saying, there's a little more to it. And that would be then the dialogue getting started of the rajas, back and forth. And so the rajasic is going to open up opportunity. And of course, be aware of that. And so, but to actually see the rajasic in action is sattvic. And so you don't try to suppress, in the practice of yoga, you don't try to suppress the rajasic or the tamasic, but you just go, because all of these states of mind are considered sacred. And so if you're mindful while they arise.
Which is, it's kind of leads to this, we have two more questions, I think.
Good, yeah.
So how do you develop, how do you release and let go of ambition? And that's, assuming you need to, assuming it has become something negative, that has, the ego trailing alongside or propelling it. And how do you develop that skill? And it really is, it begins with just noticing motivation behind the ambition is, and noticing if the ambition is doing damage to you or to someone else. And once you notice that, then if you're a nice person, and probably you are, then you find the path to practice tyag with it a little bit, to set it aside.
Yeah.
And then it was a great question: how do we cultivate the ability to yield and let go and revel in the pleasure that results from letting go? And that answers itself, is that when you let go and you feel how good it feels to do that, and juxtapose it with when your leg popped off and you were trying to put it behind your head, then that's how you do it, is really look at it openly and recognize, the good feeling of letting go.
If we say the pleasure of letting go, you have to know that we're using the word pleasure not as simply a pleasant sensation, but as something deeper. It's a metaphor. And this comes from that sense of sharing with Sangha. In other words, other beings, possibly even human beings, but we'll take any being. That sense of sharing gives you that sense of, wow, it's a kind of an indescribable pleasure that doesn't fall under the category of just being an impermanent object of pleasure that you get attached to. And so it takes the community of all other beings to really get that sense of deeper pleasure, satisfaction.
And to bear in mind that pleasure and desire are not inherently negative, which leads to the last question. And it's, how do you deal with desire?
Right. Desire, I think, is a natural part of the mind. And so, let's say I desire to be enlightened. Okay, and when you're practicing that, you'll notice that desire. I desire, or perhaps worse, I desire to reign over the universe and have all beings for breakfast on a daily basis, which means you got to be reborn as cereal constantly for me. But the fact that that's just part of manifesting in time and space, and is, a kind of desire. Even I desire liberation. Well, that's a kind of mental construction in which you have to have an idea of what liberation is, but you've got it. You've got space and time, the mind manifesting. And so you have to see that desire it's separating the object of desire out, but desire in and of itself as a phenomenon is quite a nice vibration. It's just that when there's a subject and object, that it becomes infinite suffering. So you can't live with it, you can't live without it. So the manifestation of space and time, which is the process of avidya, or confusion, is sacred. And it's experienced as, when you see that there's no one in there, then there's that sense of happiness and release.
It's a good lead into the chant.
Oh, yeah, there's a chant we were thinking of. And it's easy to research. And I'll pull it up here. And this is what's called a Shantipat. So a Shantipat is the descent, it's the chanting, the different chants of the descent of Shanti, which means clarity. Often translated as peace, but Shanti, also means this vibrant warmth. Warmth in the metaphorical sense of like, Shanti. And there's so many Sanskrit words and then Pali words and words in all of those related languages related to Shan. And you just have to know what they mean by it. And so the Shantipat that precedes the Isha Upanishad, which we're talking about, we'll chant that a few times. And this one it's a funny one in that it tricks you, or it tricks most new practitioners, because the way the melody at the end of the chant, which everyone is used to, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, there are 3 tones involved, but in this chant you're only allowed 2 tones. Okay, which it's very upsetting to many people at first, because often they'll make a mistake at the end. And so, I'll tell you, I'll chant it, and then I'll tell you what it means, and then we'll chant it a few more times. And so we set the main tone of the chant by just saying Om. Purnam Adha Purnam Udam Purnat Purnam Udhachate Purnasya Purnam Adhaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We'll do it again. Om Purnam Ada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udhachate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So I'll explain it, then we'll chant it a few more times. So Purnam means whole, full, complete. Pur is full, like if your cup is full, you're Purnam. Okay. And so this, or that, Ada means that. So that, which is anything we refer to, like that lecture, is Purnam. And so that is Purnam. It is completely full, complete, wonderful. And then, that is the perfect, complete whole. Purnam idam. This, idam, is perfect and whole. So if we made an object, then the subject, or however you want to divide it. Purnat purnam udachate. It said that from the, out of the whole, comes the whole. So if you take the whole out of the whole, so if you have any image of what the whole is, be careful. Because we're going to take that which is the entire whole reality, and we're going to take the entire whole reality out of the entire whole reality. So from the whole comes the whole. The whole remains whole, even as the whole comes out of the whole. Okay. So, and that you're only allowed 2 notes. There's not a higher note. Okay. Om Purnam Ada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnam Ada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnam Ada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So that is the perfect whole. This is the perfect whole. From the whole comes the whole. The whole remains whole, even as the whole comes out of the whole.
Try getting ambitious about that. So, thank you
Thank
so
you very
much for
much.
joining us, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.